first quarter of this book is focused on the book of Numbers. We're going to be reading the book of Numbers in the Old Testament this quarter.
We'll spend today, a big part of today, kind of just setting the stage on where we're at in Numbers, going through the history leading up to the Israelites where they're at now in this point in Numbers. So that's where we'll start on today. If we could, let's go to the Lord in prayer before we start. Father God, we come to you again on Sunday morning, Lord, thanking you for another day, Lord, thanking you for another week that we can come together and learn more about you and worship you, Lord, here as a body of believers. God, we pray that you will be with us this quarter as we look at the Old Testament, God. There's a lot of controversy in the world over the God of the Old Testament not being the same God of the New Testament, God. But we know from several places in the Old Testament, Lord, we know in Jonah that when he talks about you being a loving, compassionate God, Lord, and back in the Old Testament, slow to anger. God, we pray that you will be with us as we look at these scriptures, God, as we look at these lessons. Help us to learn more about you, Lord, and learn more about you being a consistent God from the beginning of time until now. Go with us this morning, Lord. Help us to learn from one another and learn from your word. In Christ's name, amen. So our first passage is in Numbers chapter 11 is where we start. But today I want to start out back in Exodus chapter 14 and kind of look at the Exodus from Egypt. So in Exodus chapter 14, the Israelites have escaped from Egypt after all the plagues. We're going to talk through all the different plagues, and you guys help me out with any details about the plagues. For a couple reasons, I want to do it as just kind of history leading up to where we're at, but also there's a point to make about these plagues in today's lesson. What was the first plague that was brought on Israel? On Egypt? Red Sea turned to blood, right? So there was water that turned to blood. For days, they didn't have drinking water. It killed all the fish that were in the sea. The whole country basically smelled really, really bad. If you can imagine dead fish combined with blood, the smell of blood, so it smelled really bad. That was the first one. What was the next one? Second one was frogs. There were frogs everywhere. All over the country. More details about that if anybody finds interesting that you want to share. So the third one was what? Gnats, lice, pests, right? So it filled the land, filled Egypt with lice, with gnats, pests to bug the people. That was the third one. The next one was what? Flies and wild animals, it says. So flies were let loose in Egypt. Who did it affect? Did it affect everybody, or did it affect just the Egyptians? Just the Egyptians. But did the Israelites know what was going on? So they knew about all these plagues. They saw all the plagues that were affecting the Egyptians, but they themselves weren't affected by most of them. So the next one, after the flies, the bugs, the wild animals, what was the next one? The livestock, the plague of all the livestock, right? Pestilence. So all the livestock were plagued with disease, causing most of them to die. So the people of Egypt have lost their source of water. Then they've been bugged with pests, and now they've lost all of their meat, their livestock, their animals. What was the next one? Boils. Who all did the boils hit? So the king himself got boiled, right? The whole country, not the Israelites again, but at least all the men. I don't know if it says women and children. But I know at least all the men in the country of Egypt got boils on their body. All of these things trying to persuade the king or the Pharaoh to let God's people go, to let them out of slavery and let them go. What was the next one? The hailstorm, the worst ever in Egypt, right? The worst hailstorm they've ever seen. Winds, thunder, hail. So Moses actually went and warned Pharaoh about the hail that was coming, right? And some of the Egyptians took heed and believed him, and they stayed inside. But others were kind of, I guess they, I don't know was they were resistant, stubborn, thank you. They were stubborn. They didn't get their livestock in, they didn't go in themselves, and so a lot of people that stayed outside during these storms, as well as their livestock, their animals, were killed by the hail and high winds. What was the next one? So what did the locusts do? So the hail damaged a lot of the food that was in the fields. So now they've lost their water, they've lost their cattle. Now the hail destroyed a lot of their crops, and what was left of it, the locusts came and ate up the rest of what was in the fields. And then what was the next one? For 3 days, there was darkness. It says nobody could leave their home for 3 days. Darkness throughout Egypt. So all of these things, these are 9 things leading up to trying to convince a stubborn Pharaoh to let God's people go. And then what was the final one that God said, this will make him change his mind. This will make him let my people go. The firstborn, yeah. So all the firstborn in Egypt were killed. I think this happened, was it at midnight or in the middle of the night one night? All the firstborn were killed. Again, all this just happened to the Egyptians. It didn't happen to the Israelites. This is where the Israelites were told to put the blood over their door, right? So that when death came, they would pass over the houses of the Israelites. So after the last plague, what happens? Pharaoh says, get out of here. You know, I've had enough. You've taken all our food, you've taken all our water, all our livestock, everything, and now you're taking our firstborn. The country's afraid that they're going to be next, that the whole country is going to come to ruin if the Israelites don't leave. They believe in the God of the Bible. They understand that the God of the Bible is the one true God. And so that was actually probably one of the points that God was trying to make as he was sending these plagues upon Egypt, is trying to show God, the God of the Bible, was the one true God. He was more powerful than all of the Egyptian gods that they had at the time.
It was interesting at the very beginning of this that Merrell said, who is your God? I don't know your God. Why should I believe you? And so all throughout here, people know that I am God.
Right.
You will know.
I believe that was the purpose. God could have easily plucked Pharaoh to the side and got his people out. But I believe God chose this procedure to show his people. It wasn't, Pharaoh was nothing, he was just on. God hardened his heart so that he would not let his people go, so that his people would see the power of God and to know that God is God. It was for his people, Israel. Egypt was just a pawn.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So as we see when the Israelites finally make it to the promised land along those lines, they make it to the city of Jericho, and the people in the city of Jericho, the people have heard about the parting of the Red Sea. They've heard about all these plagues that were brought on the Egyptians because they were holding the Israelites as slaves. And so, to your point, yeah, it served as a good example. Word that spread across not only Egypt, but way outside of Egypt as well. The God of the Bible was way more powerful than any of the gods that anybody at the time served. So Pharaoh goes and he drives the Israelites out of Egypt. How are they let out of Egypt? Where do they follow when they're leaving Egypt? Because they're at night. Where do they follow? Pillar of fire. So at night it's a pillar of fire, by day it's a cloud, right, that they follow. Cloud by day, fire by night. So God sends this cloud for them to follow. What path does he make them follow when they're leaving Egypt? Toward the Red Sea. And that's not the shortest path, right? Why does God say he's not going to send them down the shortest path through the Philistine country? They're not ready for it. God knows that he knows these people. He knows the Israelites. And he knows that if they run into resistance, if they run into war, they're going to flee back to Egypt, back to slavery in Egypt, and they're not going to continue down this path. So God was afraid to let them go that direction, go the shortest path. So he sent them along the path of the desert toward the Red Sea. It doesn't take long for Pharaoh to change his mind. If we look at Exodus chapter 14, verse 8, I think this is one I actually want to read out of the King James Version. Exodus chapter 14, verse 8. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. I wanted to point out that verse. What does it mean that the Israelites left with a high hand? So the NIV and other versions use the word boldly. They were proud. They were, kind of haughty about it, if you will. They weren't humble necessarily. They were kind of walking out with their chests bowed out, right?
Another one of mine says, escape so defiantly.
Defiantly, yeah, that's a good word. So we see right before Pharaoh changes his mind, right before he pursues them, we see made mention that they're walking out boldly, they're walking out with a high hand, and they're walking out almost defiantly against the Egyptians. That look at our God has delivered us from you, and now we're just going to walk right out of here. But how quickly does their attitude change? So if we keep on reading, I'm going to switch back to the NIV just because it's easier to read from. In Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Let us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." So already, they just, right before this, they were walking out of Egypt. Do they not remember the 10 plagues? Do they not remember these things that God did for them to free them from the Egyptians, to free them from slavery? They've got the one true God on their side who proved to be the one true God. And they're already saying, why did you just bring us out here to die? They're not looking to God to protect them. They don't think God can protect them, even after all the 10 things that happened before. Blood everywhere, dead fish, the whole country stinks. That first one would have been enough for me to just kind of prove who God is. He is the one true God. But there were 9 of them. There were all kinds of things that they had to show the power of their God. So don't they remember what God already did to the people of Egypt? So the second part is, why is their cry at this point not one of a sincere request to God? Why are they not just asking God, okay, God, they're coming after us, what do we do next? For some reason, they almost just quickly, instantly, as soon as they see trouble, turn their back on God and say, why? Why were we brought here? Why are we at this point? And the complaints of the Israelites, I think, also get to Moses, and they keep Moses from thinking straight, because if we move on, we'll see Moses' reaction is that he tells them, what? Yes, stand firm, sit still, right? God will fight for you. And God's reaction to Moses is what? Basically, why are you crying out to me, right? God said, literally the words in the Bible, why are you crying out to me? And then the rest of it, he's basically telling Moses, what did I tell you to do? You're leaving Egypt. Flee Egypt. Keep going. Press on, right? He says, keep going. Take your staff, part the Red Sea. Make sure that when you come to me, you know what you're asking me for. And so we all know what happens next. The cloud that they were following, cloud by day, fire by night, separates the Israelites from the Egyptians overnight. The Red Sea parts, the Israelites go through on dry ground, and they're pursued by the Egyptians until they get past the waters. They get past the sea, and the waters are turned down and drown all the Egyptian army. So I think it's really easy for us to sit back and to judge the Israelites as they complain, right? It's so funny for us to watch their lack of faith because we're sitting here 3,500 years later and we're reading about it. We see the whole story. We read the whole story unfold. Not only do we know what's leading up to it, we know what happens after. It's the same God that we're serving today. We know the big picture, right? We know what's going to happen. So we do know that they eventually make it to the promised land. We're not just sitting there with them in the moment, looking back at this big army that's approaching them. We know what happens in the end, right? So what do you think God thinks when he looks at the big picture of America? You think there's a similar story there? So as we sit back and look at the Egyptians, we're kind of quick to judge how silly were they, all these things that God did to deliver them from the Egyptians, and they just continued to complain. They continued to just turn away from God and say, why, God, why? I think we've got a similar story for America. But what about as individuals? What is the big picture of our lives? Do we have a similar story? What are the complaints that we seem to come up with all the time that are such a big deal to us right now, if you really just step back and look at the big picture of things, there's not really a big deal. I think about a year ago, I shared one of the videos that went around several years ago about third world people reading first world problems. So, we have first world problems. We have problems that we have to make up problems. We have to make up things to complain about because we pretty much have everything that we need, right? Just take a single trip to Walmart, for example. Who hates to go to Walmart? Everybody, right? We hate to go to Walmart. Why do we hate to go to Walmart? We pull in the parking lot, can't find a parking spot anywhere close to the door. So you might have to walk 100 yards in the heat from your air-conditioned car to the air-conditioned Walmart store, right? You grab a buggy and the wheels are messed up and they're bumpy as you go along. So you got to switch your buggy out. You get up. I've done it. That's right. We all get frustrated, right? We have these things that just really aren't a big deal. So we walk through Walmart, we go to the deli, and it takes the deli guy like 10 minutes to cut all the meat and cheese that I want. That's a lot my fault because we get a lot of it. I get like 3 pounds of meat and cheese. It's going to take me 10 minutes to cut the meat and cheese. But we get frustrated about these things. So then you go to the checkout line. If there's more than 3 people in every checkout line, what's the first thing you do? You roll your eyes, you sigh, oh, they never have enough people working. We find things to complain about. So then we get up there, and we pay, we swap our credit card. We just went with a list of 3 things. And we came out with a buggy full of items, and we spent way more than we wanted to spend. Oh, I didn't want to spend that much. Swap the credit card, we paid for it. So then, what does that big picture look like? I mean, if you really step back, all these things that we find to complain about, and it's not all our fault. We've been programmed to do this over the years, right? Our parents did it, so we do it. Our friends do it, so we do it. It's contagious. But what does that big picture really look like? We got to go to a single store with a selection of pretty much anything that we want. We got to fill up a buggy full of food, enough food that we don't have to go get food for the next week, 2 weeks, however long you stock up for. When you went up to pay, you swapped your credit card. Yeah, it was a lot of money, but in the end, we really had an issue paying that bill for the food that we bought. No, we complained about it when we're standing there checking out and paying for it. But in the end, none of us really worry about how we're going to pay for this food that we bought. And if you went and bought a big screen TV while you were there, that might be a different story. But in the big picture of things, we've really got to get all this. We go out and go back out to the car, load our car up, get everything loaded back up in our refrigerator or freezer at home. Keeps our food good, keeps it cold until we're ready to use it.
That's unless you can't find your car,
Yeah, okay, so if you can't find your car, that's a good point.
They're all hanging, by the way.
So we go put the food back in the fridge. All this really happens within about 2 hours. Think about just 100 years ago. Would we even think about getting stuff like that done within 2 hours? That was a dream 100 years ago, to be able to go do what we do in our trip to Walmart that we now sit here and complain about. So I think, as Americans, where we're at in our country, we have to find things to complain about. That's just one example that I think we can all kind of have fun with, but it's a very good example of things that we don't really look at the right perspective as we complain about things.
I heard someone complaining the other day that they had too much Alabama apparel in their Walmart and they're to see.
Well, that's a good complaint. I can go along with that. So now let's look at the passage. Sorry? So let's flip over to the passage from today's lesson. We'll start looking at Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Now when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, For the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and when Moses prayed to the Lord, the fire was quenched. So he called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had burned among them. Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." Now the manna was like a coriander seed, and its color like the color of bdellium. I said that right. The people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, or beat it in the mortar, cooked it in pans, and made cakes of it. And its taste was like the taste of a pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna fell on it. I'm going to pause there. And I want to flip over and read a section in the book on page 14. It's a section that really stuck out to me in the second full paragraph on the page there. In the middle of the paragraph, it says, "Hunger was not the problem. God had rained down manna on them to eat. They wanted better food. They wanted more palatable food. They wanted more variety, more taste. The problem for Israel went deeper than physical cravings. They wanted God at their beck and call. He was to satisfy their every whim. As at other times, an example in Exodus chapter 14, what we just talked about, Israel returned to Egypt in heart. The people forgot the slavery, the oppression, and the idolatry, and remembered the fish, the cucumbers, and the melons. This is a really good point. Going along with the example I just gave, I think we're often quick to think about the negative things. Just as human beings, it's our tendency to focus on negativity. It's our tendency to focus on the bad things. And if we're not careful, we can let that consume ourselves. And so that's really what this passage is saying, what the book's saying here. They were focused on the negative things. They weren't looking at, they were focused on the negative things of right now. They weren't looking at the bigger picture, all the positive things of where God had delivered them from. They just wanted something to complain about. They wanted something better than where they were at. So continuing on in verse 10 through 15. "And then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every one at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Moses was also displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, 'Why have you afflicted your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child, to the land which you swore to their fathers. Where am I to get meat to give all these people? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now. If I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness.'" So one thing to point out there is that the people are asking for meat. That's what they're praying. They're weeping for. They're saying, we don't have enough to eat. Now, it's not really true at this point, the way I understand it, that they don't ever have meat, right? I think before this point, God had sent quail on occasion at night for them to catch in camp so that they can have a feast of meat to eat. But evidently, it's not often enough for them. It's not good enough for them. They want more. They want it all the time, every day. They want to indulge in the best of the best. So now we look at Moses and we see, in this case, Moses ends up looking to God, and Moses has an honest conversation, or even you could say a confrontation with God at this point. It doesn't seem fair to Moses that he's sitting in the middle of this kind of argument between God and the Israelites. It's almost like a mediator between a father and a child who's acting up, right? Every time Moses goes to the Israelites and tells them what God wants to do, they're just complaining about something else. And so Moses will go back to God with their complaints, and God says, but they're not listening to me and they're not doing what I'm saying. And so he's just stuck in the middle. So he ends up telling God in the end, my burden is too great. It's too great for him to bear. He can't win on either side with God or the Israelites. And so that he ends up going as far as to say he'd rather die than bear that burden. I think that's interesting. That's not the typical conversation we would have with God, right? It's not a normal conversation that you would see. It's a tough conversation. It's a difficult conversation. And we get to look next week at God's response, so I won't go too much into that. But I think we already know God didn't just strike Moses dead right then, did he?
He was patient with Moses as he was with his people. Moses was a good man, and he realized what a burden the children of Israel would be on him as a go-between. But he was basically the thing that kept God from killing the Israelites just right out.
Yeah.
He was.
So God understood, right? Yeah. So God, I think, wants our honesty. A lot of times we might be afraid to talk to God like this. But he wants our honesty. He wants us to seek him. He wants us to look to him when we don't know what else to do. When we are our most frustrated, our most vulnerable, don't be afraid to pray. Don't be afraid to seek God and ask God, what do I do next? I don't know how I got here. I don't know what to do next. Just as the Israelites did when they were being chased after they'd gotten out of Egypt, they'd gotten out of slavery. They thought they were home free, and here comes a big army behind them. Let that be a lesson for us. There's all kinds of lessons that we have in the Old Testament. Let that be a lesson for us, that our instant reaction doesn't need to be, oh no, what's God doing to us? Oh no, what's going on? If we would just turn to God, just like Moses did here. I think this is a really good example. Moses, instead of going and complaining to Aaron or any of the other Israelites, he goes straight to God. He says, God, what gives? I'd much rather die than be in this situation. Moses is considered one of the most righteous men in history, but he was still human. He was still frustrated. He was still vulnerable at times. And so what makes him righteous isn't that he was perfect at all times. What made him righteous is because he looked to God in all situations, the good and the bad. He shared his joys with God, and he shared his frustrations with God. So what is the takeaway from today's lesson? I'm about to wrap up, so if you have any comments, please chime in. The takeaway from today's lesson is what it's all about as Christians. Quit complaining. We've got all kinds of things that we think we should complain about, but in the end, what do we have to complain about? The God, the creator of this universe, is on our side. The God who sent his Son to die on the cross for our sins is on our side. Instead of thinking about all the negative things, think about the positive things. And then, of course, as Moses did, always go to God for direction. That's what I have for the lesson today. Does anybody have any discussion topics before we close?
I have a story I'd like to share with everyone about. I was on a ship after World War II in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and there was 6,000 on the ship. There was a man walking around on the ship with a band on his arm. Instead of MP, it had MG. I approached him. I said, "Sir, can I talk to you?" He said, "Let's sit down and talk." It's about 2 hours before sundown. He said, "Son, you're 19-year-old. The war has just ended. Said you have a good chance to go back home. But said when you get back home, said you'll live in a push-button world. Said you'll go to bed at night, get up, push a button. Your breakfast will be prepared for you." I said, "Sir, this band you have on MG." He said, "That's military government." Said, "I'm going to Japan to help my father form Japan a government." So that's one experience that I've had in life, and that happened 75 years ago. And when I see somebody punching that, I think of this story that I.
Yep, good story. Anybody else have any comments, stories to share on the lesson today? John, would you care to close the word prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you, Father, for your word that you have preserved for us. Father, we thank you for the stories that we see, the great power that you brought to bear on Egypt, to get the children of Israel out of there, and yet how that they quickly forgot that power in the face of just everyday problems. Help us, Father, as we walk every day, to remember that the same power that